Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Now, the next point that we need to focus on is the historian's viewpoint on the impact of European settlement on indigenous population. Now, this is again another important point that you need to focus on. So, when we are talking about historian students, you know that whenever you're a student of history, so somewhere when we are talking about the historical terms or the historical perspectives, you know that it always stays in gray part. There is nothing called white or black. Somewhere this is the grayish part in which we have our own perception by reading all the available sources that we have around us and try to objectify things on that basis. So here when we are talking about the historians, they also had their own viewpoints on the impact of European settlement that was happening on indigenous population. So European settlers in the USA, they induced or forced the natives. So certain things that was quite visible through the sources that were available from the region here. We see that historians, they definitely pointed out one thing, that the European settlers or the immigrants that we are talking about in the United States of America or North America that we have been talking about it. So we see that they forced the natives definitely to sell their lands after signing treaties. So therefore there were so many treaties that were being signed and the lands were taken from the native people. Even the US government officials had no sympathy with the native people who had been unjustly deprived of their lands. Now, another important thing I would really like to remind that again and again I have been pointing out this, that whenever we are talking about the native people, they were not aware with the mix of let's say economy that was being utilized, or let's say it was being exploited in some sense by the European immigrants here. So here we see that US government as well, somewhere officials that we are talking about, they also had no sympathy with the native people, the tribal people that we are talking about, who had been unjustly deprived of their lands. So here we see that in the year 1832, Justice Marshall, the Chief Justice of Supreme Court, he said, or he passed a judgment here that Cherokees, they were the distinct community. So here when we are talking about one of the earliest or the native tribes here, that is the Cherokees, you might have heard the term, or you can look in the images. Whatever images I've been showing you, one of them was for the Cherokees here. So they were the distinct community occupying its own territory in the region, in which the laws of Georgia had no force, that they had sovereignty in certain matters. Okay. So here what happened here, that the US President Andrew Jackson at that particular time was against. Now one more thing that I would like to add on here is that you might have learned about the American Civil War. So, and the American War of Independence. So basically, when we are talking about the Americans living in these regions, somewhere they wanted independence or freedom, because they somewhere understood that how people they have been utilizing or exploiting them. So this was against the British colonies, the French colonies, and all the other colonies. Somewhere they wanted to defeat. For example, when we are talking about the 13 colonies, the American War of Independence, it was under the British colony. So here we see that how France helped the American region to gain independence here, right? So these are certain things that you have to remember here. Now, US President at that particular time, Andrew Jackson, he was against the economic and political privileges, but he did not come for the secure of their rights. Now, students, we see that how these people, in fact, when we are talking about the privileged and the powerful people in US themselves, they were not, supporting the natives who were being exploited or who were being treated unjustly as their lands were being taken. Okay. So here we see that the whole process that were taking place, or the historian's viewpoint in that sense, is that the whites, they occupied the land of the tribals. Now here, because the whites, they were occupying these lands, so somewhere the natives, they were pushed westwards. Okay. Now many tribes, they were compelled to share the land originally occupied by one tribe. Now initially what happened, that there was no land hunger, like I'm telling you again and again. So somewhere what happened, that whenever we are talking about different tribes, they had their own land, X, Y, Z, A, something like that. They had their own lands. Now what happened? Now because the land of X was taken by any white person here, so X now had to, A had to share his land with X here. So here in a land that was first possessed by A, now A and X, they had to, work together in this land. Okay. Now this also led to quarrels at times. What happened, that when we are talking about the native people, somewhere they were also, humans. So there was a tendency to show their supremacy everywhere. So we see that quarrels were happening over land disputes here, and somewhere end of the day, they were confined. The natives, they were confined to the small areas that was known as reservations. Now students, when we are talking about the next part here, we need to understand about the importance of gold rush. That what was this incident that happened in North America and and exactly what were the changes that happened later on. Okay, now students, when we're talking about the immigrant Europeans here, definitely you are already aware that they were intruding into the areas where the natives they were living. Now somewhere in the regions of California, super duper important point here that everyone needs to understand, that when we're talking about the immigrants, we see that they had found traces of gold in California in the region of USA in 1840s. So let's have a look at the map here in order to understand the whole point. You can obviously look at the atlas in order to identify the region of California, and somewhere in the year that is around 1840s that we are talking about, this is the Californian region, the gold fields that was identified or traced by the European immigrants. Just look at these images and just see that how these people, they had found the traces of gold. Now when we are talking about gold rush, what do we understand by this? It means that if you have found trace of gold somewhere, you know that this might be a gold mine, a place where much gold in a larger quantity might be found. So definitely it led to the gold rush here. When we look at this important event that took place in America, so it changed the whole situation here. What happened exactly? So on January 24th, 1848, there was a foreman, James W. Marshall, who discovered gold in the region of California. Now when he discovered gold somewhere, the news spread in different areas. And because of this touched off an important incident, or let's say landmark movement that took place in the region of North America, that suddenly if everyone is hearing about gold, that there is a gold mine that has been excavated, so the Europeans, they started coming to the region of North America because they wanted, or they dreamt of taking maximum fortune, something that they could acquire, and knew that they would become filthy rich. So somewhere you need to understand this point. Now the railways were being constructed across the continents. Now you know that these areas, they are miles apart here. When we are talking about the region of Northern California, when we are talking about the region of California in general, and when we are talking about the region of Europe, we know that they are miles apart. So somewhere what exactly was happening? So railway was being constructed so that people could come in this area and take as much gold as they could and make a fortune because of it. So here, when we are talking about the railways being constructed, many Chinese workers, they were hired into this thing in order to do the whole construction of the railways here. Now here, again, another important point that you need to understand here is that after the whole event of gold rush, we see that there were so many Europeans again who came in large number in these regions, and again they were in the hindsight, the main idea was to maximize their profit. Now here, when we are talking about the region of USA, somewhere people, they were now very much aware that the independence, the thing that we are talking about, freedom, when we are talking about the Europeans coming and taking everything, acquiring different things here. So somewhere this was something that brought about an inevitable change. What was the inevitable change? The growth of industries that was taking place, or that were taking place in these areas. Now students, because of this, what was happening, that at this particular time, all these small peasants, so here when we are talking about the growth of industrial towns, somewhere you need to understand that what was the reason behind the growth of industrial towns here? There were so many small peasants who were losing their lands to the big landlords. Somewhere in the forest areas, or let's say in the village areas or the rural areas, what happened exactly? That these small peasants, they did not have a large amount of land. But big landlords somewhere, they were trying to occupy all these areas, all these lands that were taken by, or that were in the hold of the small peasants. Now these small peasants, they did not want to, destroy their livelihood just by living off any, taking the salary from any landlord or working under them. So what they decided to move on to the urban areas where they could, join or work in the factories because of the concept of industrialization somewhere. Now, when we're talking about railways, you definitely need certain industries in order to build all these implements that were required to make a bridge. Let's say when we are talking about a railway bridge, or whether we are talking about the railway tracks and so on. So we needed an industry there. So these industries, they were being constructed by the Europeans somewhere, and also these people, the small peasants, they came to the urban areas in order to work in these factories or industries. So here this led to the people increase in the number of people who were migrating to the city areas, and they started living in those areas. This led to the growth of industrial towns in different regions of North America. So here the basic idea was to manufacture railway equipment. So because of this, industries, they started growing. In 1819, we see that USA, the United States of America, became a leading industrial power in the world. Super duper important point that no one can forget here. Just look at these people. These were the people, and they were trying to build railway lines. Here you can see that these are the industrial workers that we are talking about. And when we are talking about the gold mines that were found in the region of California, you can see this image and try to understand that how was it done here. Okay, the next point that we need to focus on here is the struggle for constitutional rights. Now students, the settlers in the US, they fought for independence from the British rule. You already have looked at the map here. You already have learned about the 13 colonies of the American region that was directly under the control of the British Empire. So we see that the settlers who were living in this region here, we see that they were fighting for independence. Somewhere you can look at these images. You will find a lot of images on Google here. So after a lot of fights, after lots of sacrifices and everything, we see that USA, the United States of America, that we know as a country today, one of the most powerful countries today, that came into existence. Now the Constitution of the United States, which came into force in AD 1787, it included the individual's right to property, which the state could not deny to its citizens. So here we see that somewhere like our Indian Constitution that came after the India's independence, likewise the United States of America here, they also made their own constitution that came into force, that was enforced in the year 1787, and it was talking about the individual rights to property, which the state they could not deny to any citizens in that particular region here. Now, the next point that we need to focus on is the winds of change in North America. Now, students, since the beginning of the whole chapter, we have come far talking about the independence of the United States. Finally, you have seen that how the people in America and different regions, they were trying to, look forward to their own independence. So when we are talking about the 13 colonies, they got their independence, they made their own constitution, the United States of America that we know of today. And now let us try to understand that what was the transition that was taking place in North America. So here we see that the government took no measures to improve the conditions of the native people of the USA and Canada. We have already taken the examples of the Cherokees here. So one of the earliest known tribes who lived in a different manner, and they had their own distinct style and their own culture. So we see that the government, they were not taking any measure to improve the condition of all these people, of all the native people that were living in the regions of USA and Canada. The second point that we need to understand here is that the major hit for the region for North America here was the economic depression of 1929 and 32. Now before this, you also might have learned about the First World War. So if I were to ask you the timing for the First World War, you know that it was 1914 to 1918. We know that US had also participated in the First World War. So it was from the Allied side, and they were the victorious one. Now, when we are talking about the participation of US, if they participated in the war, they know that they had a lot of finances that they had put on arms and ammunitions and other resources. But again, when we are talking about a period that is 1929 and 32, we see that US was worst hit with the economic depression that took place with the fall of the stock exchange that took place at the Wall Street that was located in Manhattan in USA. So here you need to understand that this time the situation in the United States, it was quite grim, and all the people who had their stake in these stock exchanges, we see that somewhere they were hard hit with the economic depression. It led to the fall in the prices of all the commodities, in the demands and everything. People, they lost their jobs. People, they were moving from places to places. They did not have any food they did not have any place to live. So unemployment, then poverty, then people bearing a lot of losses. These were the certain things that were happening because of the economic depression that took place, because the stock exchange, it fell in US, and it had a larger impact because we see that somewhere it was a creditor to all the nations, and now it again became a debtor. So this was a very difficult situation here. There was another act that was passed, that is the Indian Reorganization Act of 1834. So here we see that according to this act, there was basically change that took place, that people, they were allowed to buy lands and they were allowed to take the loans. Later on, we also see that natives, they accepted the citizenship here in North America. So yes, students, when we are talking about North America, these are certain points that you cannot forget. In short, I have just explained you all these points, and you need to look at the book and try to understand in detail here. Another part that we are going to talk about is Australia. Now, till now, we have been talking about the discovery of North America. We also saw that how the people who were living in North America, the natives of North America, the different tribes of North America, how their connection or coordination with all the other European powers had been. And also we talked about how they got independence, and also we talked about the sharing of the power. We talked about the nature of the power that existed after the independence of America in this region. So we call it as the United States of America today. Now students, when we are talking about Australia, everyone knows that if we are talking about the geography, or the, let's say, the location of Australia here, so it lies in the southern hemisphere. And here, when we are talking about the continent that is Australia, we need to understand how did the discovery of this large continent, the landmass, took place, and also what happened when people, they discovered this land, and what were the changes that were made here, and who are the people who were living here. These are certain questions that we are going to understand in this topic, that is Australia. We will also talk about the economic development of this particular region. So here students, one thing that you must remember is that whenever we are talking about the whole world, there were different continents here, and discovery of all these continents, somewhere it led to coming up of people from different areas as well. So here Australia was the most isolated large landmass in the world. Now if you look at the image here, just look at or focus on this image, we see that the British people, they visited this region here, and they found that this was a region that was the most isolated part of the world, the most isolated landmass. It means that the word isolated here, it signifies the point that people who were living in this region, they were also not knowing what existed in the outside world. They were not aware of places such as Southeast Asia, China, let's say. Historians, they have their own views, which I'll tell you later on. But right now, just believe that isolation here, it means that they were living in their own zone. Right, so they were bounded in their own zone, and people who were living far west, in the far western regions, they were also not aware that such a landmass was existing in the southern hemisphere as well. So yes, because of this, what we see is that whenever we are talking about some rare species, whenever we are talking about some plant species, mammals, we see that they have been surviving till the modern times, because it has been the most isolated large landmass, while we are talking in respective or in perspective of the discovery of these continents here. So just have a look at the region of Australia. If you have a look at today's map of Australia, you will find it quite different from the map that historians have tried to depict of this region while it was being discovered by other European powers as well. So here, if you look at these maps, you can see the transitions that have been happening in the geographical part of the whole region here. So initially in the year 1788, if we are saying about this year, we see that there is a transition in which we have one region here, that is the grey shade, the new region that was known as the New South Wales. Now here, this was in 1851, this became Western Australia, this became New South Wales, this was the Southern Australia, and this was the region of Victoria. So here we are talking about the invasion, or let's say the coming up of the British Empire, and when they established their colony in this region, when Australia became a colony to the British Empire. Now the third map here is for the year 1825. So here what do we see in 1825? This is Western Australia. Okay, just we'll go down and then this side. So we have Western Australia and New South Wales. Then we have South Australia in 1836, 1851, Victoria. Now when we're talking about 1859, you can see that we have New South Wales, we have Southern Australia, we have Queensland here. Now after 1911, you can see a lot of things changed. So we have the first region here, the second is the Northern Territories, third is the South Australia, fourth is Queensland, fifth is South Wales here, and here we have Victoria, the sixth part here, and the island Tasmania that is located somewhere near the Australian continent. So these are certain things that you need to keep in mind, because we are talking about discovery of a particular region where we see that somewhere there were certain transitions that were happening in the geography of that particular place as well. So here, if you look at the map, just focus on how it was being divided into different zones. The Western Australia part here, the southern, and today you will find different regions. If you look at today's map of Australia, you will find certain regions, Melbourne, then we will have Gold Coast, then we will have Sydney, we'll have different cities here, right? So obviously you need to understand that the whole region that we are talking about as Australia, it went to different transitions after it was being discovered by other European powers here. Now whenever we are talking about the discovery of America, please remember that the British, they established their colony here. We will try to understand that history as well. Now here, when we are talking about the people who were living, we see that these were the Aboriginals who were totally isolated from the outside world, that the whole politics, the whole social change, the cultural change that was taking place in the outside world. Now here, when we are talking about Europeans in general, we see that they did not have much interest in the history of Aboriginals, and that is why they did not write about it, right, in the 18th, 19th century that we are talking about. Also, we see that it was believed by the historians, as you know that you're reading history, and historians, they have their own views, they have their own perspective. Nothing is black or white, everything is in the gray shade here. I have been telling you time and again this point here. So when we are talking about the Aboriginals here, it is believed that whenever we are looking at the timeline, you will see that the historians, according to them, they believe that the Aboriginals might have come from the region that is South Asia, the region of Southeast Asia or South Asia. They believe that they might have migrated from that particular region and stayed in Australia. They might have seen that region and they might have started living in this region. Now here we see that the Europeans, they were not realizing the importance of the culture of the Aboriginals. So what is the meaning of Aboriginals here? Aboriginal here, it means, in simple terms, it means that we are talking about the native people. So if we give a look to these images here, for example, when we are talking about the British Empire, just look at this painting. This will try to show you that how the European powers, or let's say specifically when we are talking about the British Empire here, how they came via the sea route and they discovered this unknown land here that had been isolated for quite a long time, and they discovered the Aboriginal people, the native people who were living in this region. And while they started mingling up with the native people, the Aboriginal tribes, they understood that they might have been migrating from different regions. Specifically, they focused on the region of South Asia. So here you can see different people, the culture, the language that they were speaking. So it was quite different, right? And again, it was surprising for the Europeans also. Now here we see that as we compare it with the North Americans, the natives of the North Americans there, we see that the Europeans or the historians as well, they have certain idea of the origin of these people, that when they might have migrated or when they might have come to this region. So here when we are talking about as compared to that of the history of North America, we see that the date of the first appearance of the Aboriginals in Australia, it has not been determined. So according to historians, somewhere they vary between the period that is 10,000 years ago to that of 1 lakh years ago. So according to them, we see that the Aboriginals, they might have come in this region during this span period, 10,000 or 1 lakh years ago, they might have came here and they might have settled in this region. Now by the end of the 18th century, Australia had almost 350 to 750 native communities. All these native communities, as you can see in the image, these were the Aboriginal tribes, the native people who were living in this region. And all these native people, they had their own language, they had their own culture, they were following certain things that might have been, foreign to all the people who were coming and discovering this region. Now here we see that there were a large group of people, indigenous people, who were called as the Torres Strait Islanders, who were living in the north. Again, if I go to the map, let's go to the map again. So if I look at the map here, we see that in the northern region, in the northern territory, so they had people who were known as the Torres Strait Islanders. So I would suggest you all that please go to the map of Australia and try to find out what is this Torres Strait. Now you know that strait is a thing, let's say when we are talking about strait, it connects two land masses here. right? So here try to find out where is Torres Strait, and try to see that which region is being connected with Australian continent here through the Torres Strait in present day. Just go to the map of Australia, Google search it, or let's say you can always have atlas in front of you and try to locate this particular point that I have told you. Okay, now here, if you look at these images, you will try to understand that there were certain tribes. We are talking about the Torres Strait Islanders. Somewhere you can see the way that they were living, the dress up they had, the language that they were speaking was totally foreign to all the other people. Now, in 2005, they constituted almost up to 2.4% of the population of Australia. So here we see that they were the tribes that were living in majority in this region here. Now, when we are talking about discovery of Australia, it was not that, it was discovered by the British people at first. So here we see that when we are talking about a captain whose name was James Cook. Please remember that James Cook, he was a navigator, and it was first visited. The region of Australia was first visited by James Cook here, Captain James Cook, and the first settlement, it was established somewhere around 1788. So as you can look at this image is trying to depict how the people, they came via the sea route, and they just noticed this barren land here. They saw that it was an isolated land, and they tried to just look over that what is actually, who are the people who are living here. So somewhere they found the Aboriginals who were living inside these forests, and also they tried to establish their settlement in this region when we are talking about the British Empire. Now, here initially the European, according to the let's say the stories that the European historians have written, so based on their presumptions, we see that initially all the Aboriginals and the relation between the people who came in this region, who first settled in this region, we see that they were quite, enthusiastic and very friendly. So Captain Cook, according to what he wrote as a navigator, we see that he reported that all the natives, they were quite enthusiastic and friendly, definitely. And somewhere, but this equation between the native people and also the people who came later on here, when the British, they discovered this land here, they saw that things, they changed drastically after the death of Cook. Now it was presumed that James Cook, Captain James Cook, he was killed by the natives. See what actually happened here, that when the British Empire, they came and they settled in this region, before that James Cook, he was killed here, and he was killed by the natives. Though he was not killed in Australia, he was killed in Hawaii. Right. So here you need to understand that somewhere the equation between the native people and the people who came later on, it drastically changed. Okay. So just have a look at this box, this important box here for the discovery of Australia, the timeline that you need to remember here. So we see that in 1606, there was a Dutch adventurer, Torres, who sailed through the state which now bears his name, separating Australia and Papua. So this is an important and interesting fact that you must know. Today I told you to find that particular strait. So please find that particular strait. It was named after a Dutch adventurer whose name was Torres, and he sailed through this strait. And now this is the region that separates the two landmass here, that is Australia, and today we call it New Papua Guinea. Okay, you can find this particular place here. Then in 1623, we have Jan Cartens, who was another Dutch traveler who went along the coast of Cape Verde. Then we have in 1642, we have Tasman Islands or the Tasman lands, that is today known as Tasmania region here. In 1770, we see that Captain James Cook, he also reached Australia. In 1788, we see that British penal colony was formed here, and Sydney was founded in this particular region that you can already find in the map of Australia. So there are certain work that you need to focus on here while looking at the map. You need to find out and identify different regions. You need to see that how the the geography of the whole region of Australia, it was changing, like I showed you in the map here. And also it was very hard to believe that in the 19th and 20th century that we are talking about, in the 19th and 20th century, we see that about 90% of the population of natives here, or the Aboriginals here, they died. It was really hard to believe this fact here, that most of these people, 90%, it's a large chunk of the population here. So they died by exposure to epidemics. Please understand this point here, that they all died due to the exposure of epidemics. What is this epidemic? So you are already aware about the term, that is pandemic and epidemic. So epidemic is something that is spread, any disease that is contagious and it spread among the people who are living in a defined territory in that particular area. So we are talking about the spread of diseases that took place in that particular region because of this epidemic that spread. For example, you can take the example of influenza. So this can be an epidemic, right? Influenza flu, you might have heard about it. So many people, they died because of the influenza flu epidemic in different regions. In India also, you might have heard during the British rule in our country, we had influenza epidemic that took place, and this was epidemic. It means that something that is happening, a disease that is spreading in a particular territory. It has not spread to all parts of the world, but a particular territory. Here we are talking with respect to that of Australian region. Now here we see that another important reason for which 90% of the natives, they died, or let's say they moved from this place. Here we see that it was only because of the loss of their lands and also the resources, and in battles against the European settlers. So when the European settlers, for example the Dutch people, the British people, when they were trying to settle down in these areas, they were being, somewhere forced to go out, or they were forced to just flee from that region from the native people there. Again, another important point that I would like to focus on here is that when we are talking about the region of Australia, it was also a place where all the criminals, now here we are talking about the criminals who were deported from England. So this was a region, now this was a land that was isolated. So it was believed that a lot of criminals who had flee, or let's say whose jail term had ended, or they tried to flee from the jail, all those criminals actually, they came and settled down in the region of Australia. And once their jail term, for example the punishment that they were rewarded for the work that they had done, so basically they were deemed to be free, and then they lived as a free individual here in Australia. But initially it also became the land for the criminals here. And this is another point that you need to focus on, and you need to focus on the box here. You need to focus on the discovery of Australia, what are the different important years, and what exactly happened here. You will also learn about the economic development that took place. This is a very small topic that we will focus on now. Okay, so just remember how Captain Cook, he came and he felt that the Australians, they were very enthusiastic and very friendly, but later on the whole perspective changed when he was killed by the natives, though he was killed in Hawaii. This is another important point that you need to focus on, and how they were now being treated by the British people. So yes, these are certain points that no one needs to forget here.